We good now? That was loud, real loud. 2003, the Yankees were playing the Red Sox in the American League Championship Series. It's Game 7, right before the World Series. The winner of this game gets to go to the World Series. Just so you know, I'll let you know some of the things that take place in Greek and Scripture. It tells us that the Yankees are God's team, and the Red Sox are from the devil. It's kind of the way I feel about it. But anyways, they're playing for the American League Championship Series, and I'm much better than I used to be. Now, I don't know if it's just kids or if I just got older or maybe I just actually grew up or something, but I used to get pretty worked up during these games. I really hate the Red Sox. I might hate the Red Sox more than I love the Yankees. That's how much I don't care for the Red Sox. But they had played, and the Yankees were losing earlier in the game. They'd finally tied things up. They'd gone 2 extra innings, and Aaron Boone comes to bat. Some of you may remember Bob Boone played for the Kansas City Royals here many, many years ago. But Aaron Boone comes to bat, and he tells a story that when he was a little kid, he remembers playing with his dad and his brother in the backyard. And his dad threw him a pitch as they were playing, and he hits a home run, and he remembers the imagination. He remembers being a little kid and just imagining, I'm going to hit the home run that sends us to the World Series. I'm going to hit the home run that sends us to the World Series. And he says, I remember being 5, 6 years old and Dad throwing me this pitch where I hit the ball over into the neighbor's yard, and that was me running the bases as I send my team to the World Series. He said, I can vividly remember pictures in my head of that imagination and thinking through this dream. Well, they go into extra innings. The Yankees had just staved off this possible threat by the Red Sox. They had runners in scoring position. Staved it off. They go to the bottom of the inning. It's at home in Yankee Stadium, and as they're running in, Aaron Boone, who plays third base, is running in next to Derek Jeter, who plays shortstop. And he said, I remember looking at Derek Jeter and saying, well, what do you think? And Derek Jeter's response was, hey, the ghosts are here. Babe Ruth is with us. Lou Gehrig is with us. All the old Yankee greats are here. We'll be fine. He gets in there. He's the first person to bat in the bottom of the inning. First pitch from Tim Wakefield, and he crushes a home run to send his team to the World Series. And I jumped out of my chair like a little child. It was awesome. And yet, there was something about this whole story that I remember thinking about, and I remember hearing him tell the story, and I was blown away at how many times he talked about imagination. How many times he talked about imagining this situation, even as a little kid, about dreaming about this, about having this opportunity, and then here it comes true. Yesterday, as I had mowed the yard yesterday morning, I'd gone to take a shower, and I got up, and I come out of our room, and I look, and there are my kids, who have rearranged every single chair around the dining room table, plus the bench that we have, and they have created a train. And the bench in front is the engine, and they've got all these chairs lined up. And Harper doesn't quite recognize that caboose, with an E on the end, is how we say it, but we actually say caboosed with a T in our house. We're still working on that one. But she was telling me that I could sit in the caboose, and that we would ride the train. Holden was sitting in one of the spots, and he just kind of gets bossed around by Harper most of the time when it comes to our imagination games. And they're just playing, and have got all Harper's babies are all in this little train area, and I'm told I can sit there, and we're going to ride the train. And she's making all the noises, and she's telling us about it, and all the things are happening, and Holden, he just doesn't care. He's sitting in the middle, just eating, the goldfish things, whatever. But this is what we do. And the imagination of a child, and to think and to dream and to play, I will tell you, there are not a lot of things I wish I could go back to as a kid, just to be honest. I feel like I've got a pretty good life right now. But one of the things I wish I still had, I wish I could still find myself doing, is the dreaming and the imagination again. Because there's something about the innocence of children and in being a child and having the imagination to dream and to picture things that you're building and picture things that are coming together for something better. And I think for us, a lot of times, especially as adults, we've lost the ability to imagine. We've lost the ability to dream about God doing something better. And depending upon, I know this has been a rough week for many folks, especially in our city, with all the things that are going on in the government and all the things that are happening, and especially for some of you guys who are in here today. It's been a rough week, rough couple weeks. I think sometimes we've been so tainted by what we perceive is the brokenness of what is taking place in our world. And yes, our world has many broken issues. But I wonder if one of the things that we've lost is the ability to imagine that our God is on the throne and that He is bringing about His kingdom. And it's not a dream that's like maybe, hopefully, one day this will happen. It is He's here and He's now doing this. He's building the kingdom now. And every now and then we get a glimpse of the beauty where we can imagine this is what it's going to be like. This is what it's going to be like. When you see selflessness and you see sacrifice and you see people give themselves in extraordinary ways, you say, that's what it's going to look like. I told you we've been working through the judges here. We're coming up on Samuel, who is the last judge. And it has not been a good time in Israel's history. Every now and then, God will raise up a good judge, and the people will do all right for a little while, but it doesn't last. God brings about this little boy Samuel. His mother, in all of her humility, is able to say, God, if you give me just one child, I promise you when he is weaned, when he is ready, I will give him back to you. I will consecrate him to you. His life will be dedicated to you and to your service. Can you imagine a mother praying for so long to have a child? Then when she gets that child, as soon as this child is weaned, she gives him over to another man, to the priest of God, to be raised by him in his service. And you see the piety, you see this spirituality, you see this beauty in this woman who's willing to give her son up, and he is being raised in God's service, and God comes to him as he is sleeping. And 3 times God calls out to Samuel, Samuel, Samuel. And like a typical young child who is yet to discern what is taking place, he runs to Eli. Yes? What do you need? It's not until the 3rd time that Eli figures out it's got to be God calling this child. He says, you tell him. Next time God calls out, you tell him, speak, for your servant is listening. And he does. And God gives him a very difficult prophecy. Because Eli had not taken care of his own house. He'd not taken care of his own boys. And this young child is told to prophesy to Eli that God will destroy your house because of it. But something new is taking place. Eli will no longer be the mouthpiece of God for the people. Samuel will be. Something new is happening. Something beautiful is taking place. Something that came through the humility of his mother Hannah and now has come to bear fruit in the life of Samuel, and he will now be this righteous, humble voice of God. And it's time for Israel to dream again. It's time for Israel to imagine again the beauty of what God can do when they live under His reign. It's time for them to imagine again what covenant faithfulness looks like. What life under God's beautiful, inexplicable love and grace looks like. It's time to dream about those things again. What does this look like in relationships? What does this look like for our nation? What does this look like for our leaders? How does this help us and grow us? And it's not an easy time that takes place as Samuel kind of arises to this position where he is judging and leading Israel. The Philistines come in and they steal the Ark of the Covenant. And in God's graciousness, in Samuel's leadership, they go and they recover it. And they get it back. False idols are being torn down all over the country. They're being destroyed. Pagan rituals, sinfulness is being run out of the country because of the beauty of what's taking place in God's leadership through Samuel. And Israel is dreaming again about the goodness that they can have. They're imagining again what it looks like to live in covenant with God and for His covenant to define how they relate to one another. And it's going well. Life is going well, and then here is this huge but Samuel gets old. Samuel gets old. And now things have changed a little bit. Now his boys are doing the judging. Samuel is still the voice of God, but he is too old to be doing what he had been. And that's where we pick up our story this morning. If you want, you can go ahead and open up to 1 Samuel chapter 8. I will tell you, there are a few texts in Scripture. There are a few of them that for some reason bring me great sadness. This is one of those texts. I really have gleaned a lot from Genesis chapter 3 in the fall and what takes place. And yet, the more I look at the brokenness and the more I experience sin and the more I see how it hurts and destroys us, the more I hate that text. Because you just recognize it's not supposed to be like that. And then you get to 1 Samuel chapter 8, and you've seen this country kind of rise up out of the ashes. The people have kind of come up out of sinfulness. And something switches here. Something changes. Let's read beginning in verse 1. When Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second, Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba, yet his sons did not follow in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow in your ways. Appoint for us then a king to govern us like the other nations." But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, "Give us a king to govern us." Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, Listen to the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. just as they have done to me from the day I brought them up out of Egypt to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so also they are doing to you. Now then, listen to their voice only. You shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them." So Samuel reported all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest and to make his implements of war and to equip and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vineyards and give them to his officers and his courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves and the best of your cattle and donkeys and put them to his work. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." But the people refused to listen to the voice of Samuel. They said, "No, but we are determined to have a king over us so that we may be like the other nations, and that our king may govern us and go out before us and fight our battles." When Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. The Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to their voice and set a king over them." Samuel then said to the people of Israel, "Each of you return home." The elders of the tribes, these appointed leaders, come to Samuel and they say, "We don't like the political system anymore. We want a new one. We don't like how things are being run in the country and in our nation under God. Appoint for us a king. We want to be like all the other nations." Samuel, he recognizes what they're asking before they even understand the implications of asking for this. They want a centralized government, a monarchy like all the other nations to reign over them. But the difficulty is how does this fit into God's reign? Because if you remember last week we talked about the story of Ruth and the beauty. There was a beauty in the name of Naomi's husband, Elimelech. "My king is God," was what his name meant. And Samuel tells God, this is what the people are doing. This is what they want. And he tells them, okay, give it to them. If that's what they want, let them have it. If they want their own king instead of me, which is what's essentially taking place, is that God has set up appointed leaders underneath him, and God is king of this nation. If they want their own king to be like everybody else, if they want an identity separate from me, okay, let them have it. But you let them know. You let them know what this is going to look like. Warn them. Let them know that if they choose this route, here's what's coming. These will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take, and he will take, and he will take, and he will take 6 different times. 6 different times they are told, this king, he'll take everything from you, and you will be slaves. And it's like they've gone back to Egypt all over again. The Exodus doesn't matter. Covenant with God doesn't matter. Who they are, the identity that God had given them, their purpose to be this priesthood to the world doesn't matter because they want to be like the rest of the world. There will be a redistribution and a concentration of wealth. There will be a monopoly of land control. Completely disregard justice and the well-being of the people. Do you notice it's interesting how God doesn't even entertain the idea that this king will be benevolent and a man after his own heart? That's not even in the conversation. The conversation is simply, he will enslave you. One of the things that I think is so interesting about this text is that if you remember in verse 10, it says, the people who came to Samuel. All of Israel's not represented here. That's the interesting thing about the text. All of Israel's not represented here. The leaders are. The most elite are. Because I have a hard time believing that those who will be enslaved, those who will be taking into the king's way of life, where they will essentially work for him, I have a hard time believing that the peasants and the most poor would be like, yeah, let's have a king that's going to take everything from us. Only the most elite are here. And for maybe the first time, and I would say this, for the first time at least in their history, now there's class warfare. Because the richest of the rich, if they lose another tenth, if they lose a few slaves, if they lose a few cattle, if they lose a few of the things that make them who they are, that's not that big of a deal to them. Because they've got everything. They want a king that will protect them. Hear what it said? We want a king who will go before us and fight our battles. See, God promised them victory, but He did not promise them that they weren't going to be participants in gaining the victory. And what they want is for the king to take their stuff, and you take our people, and you go fight our battles. We don't want to have to do it anymore. We don't want to have to be participants in what's taking place. We'd rather sit back. You take our sons, our daughters, our slaves, our cattle, and whatever else you need to go win the victories, you go ahead, but we don't want to be participants in what's taking place in God's story anymore. See, now it's become a situation where this centralized government is going to take and take and take, and the most elite become consumers. The most elite become consumers. As long as they get what they want, as long as they don't have to do the work, as long as they get taken care of, whatever happens to the rest is no big deal. And now all of a sudden, you have this theological, divine war taking place. Because the company of Israel under God was defined by giving. God had given Himself to them. God had given everything He could give to them. And they were supposed to be a people that as they lived in relationship with Him, they gave themselves to one another. They gave to the poor, to the foreigner, to the widow. They gave of themselves so that nobody was in need, and oppression was not supposed to be a part of who they were. They were supposed to live lives of divine justice. Taking care of those who couldn't take care of themselves. I know it must have been incredibly difficult for them. Peer pressure finds us in all sorts of ways. What a sad statement. God, we don't really want to be holy anymore. We don't really want to be your set-apart people anymore. We want to be like everybody else. See, God calls those who live in covenant with Him to be a peculiar people. It is different, and it's a little weird, because our world is set up, our world works on power and influence and creating for yourself your own security. Not under God's reign, it doesn't. And we see the most beautiful aspect of who God is in the fact that His Son would give up all power and refuse to use His power and picks solely servanthood. And the new creation that will come through Him, they will pick that as well. God doesn't force anyone to do anything. We talked about free will last week quite a bit. If you want to live by the broken ways of the world, of power and influence, creating for yourself your own ways of security, regardless of who you have to step on to get there, go ahead. He won't stop us, just like He didn't stop them. But because He is who He is, He says, you will deal with the consequences of that style of living. And I will allow you the pain of what comes with that life. And I think there are a lot of questions here for today's church. Because sitting at the heart of 1 Samuel chapter 8 is a major identity crisis. A major identity crisis. Who are they going to be? Are they going to be defined by God's inexplicable love, His grace and love, His steadfast faithfulness that knows no boundaries? Are they going to be defined by living in covenant relationship with Him? Is that going to define how they treat others and how they see themselves in the world around them? Or do they just want to be like all the other nations? That they want to be like everybody else? And I think we have to ask ourselves, do we really want to be a holy people? Because look at what comes with being holy, set apart. It is exactly that, set apart. A peculiar people in the world that don't live like everybody else. And our systems are not built on power, they're built on sacrifice. Our relationships are not built upon influence, they're built upon servanthood. Our way of getting things done happens by witnessing to Jesus, not by dominating somebody else. This is the people of God. It doesn't mean that we don't have an opinion or a feel for what takes place in politics, economics, and social issues. But it does mean that we don't play in the broken games of the world. We don't play in those broken games. Because when the point is to use a broken system to effect good, you're going to end up with still a broken system. God, nor Jesus, nor the early church, through the Holy Spirit, even contemplate or entertain the idea that through some centralized government we can bring about the kingdom of God. They don't even entertain that idea. What they entertain is the way that creation was originally set up, and that means God is king. And His identity will give us identity and purpose. And in understanding who He said we are and who He said our purpose is, then we make decisions and we act out and build kingdom. I think the one thing about this whole text, and I know, like I said earlier in the welcome, I know in many ways, some of us far more than others are invested and we are influenced in more ways than others by those that are in Washington right now. And I know that government is a huge part of who we are. And I don't know that there is this apples-to-apples comparison between 1 Samuel chapter 8 and what's taking place in our country today. I don't see an apples-to-apples comparison here. But what I do see, and what I believe we're supposed to take from the text today, is to recognize, who cares? We're the people of God. We don't operate by the broken systems of this world, and let's stop trying. I know it's influential and it impacts us in major ways, but I would say this: if money is an issue for people in the church, then the church needs to take care of the people. If the poor are having a hard time because of the broken ways in which the world are oppressing them, then the church needs to step up and take care of the poor. If people are lonely because they don't feel a place, if people are broken because of sin, if people feel as though they don't belong and that no one cares for them, we're supposed to. That's what defines us. We don't wait for somebody else to do it. We say we are participants in the story. We're not here to take and consume. We're here to give, because we are a people defined by giving. We're defined by that. We're not waiting on somebody else to do something that God has given us identity and purpose to fulfill. Tony Campolo, one of the guys that I like to read, he's got some very radical thoughts on things. He was asked at one point why he has a retirement fund. Because one of the things that Tony Campolo pushes with the group of people that he works with is how they share their goods, kind of like the early church. They had all things in common, and they gave to all those who had need. And he said, the question kind of came to him, he said, well, that's interesting coming from you to say that we should be sharing this and sharing that and not taking securities up in the world, and you've got this retirement fund, don't you? And Tony Campolo said, yes. He said, why? Why do you have your retirement fund building these securities that we're not supposed to worry about? And he said, well, because to be brutally honest, the church wouldn't take care of me. Because the church just assumes you're supposed to handle your own business, and if you don't, well, you should have made better choices in life. I know people are broken, and I know they make bad choices. But the people of God are defined by giving. They're defined by giving. And it begins with giving thanks to God and giving generously to others. Living in this covenant relationship with God means His identity becomes our identity. And the beauty in this is that Israel was once a people under Samuel who were imagining. They were imagining again what that might look like. What it might look like for the people of God to be defined by giving. What it might look like for the people of God to be defined in their relationships by faithfulness, by God's grace and mercy. For that, they were imagining what might it look like if this was the center of our marriages? What might it look like if this was how we ran our businesses? What might it look like if this was how we took care of one another? How beautiful and what a witness to the beauty of God would it be if the church said, we will live lives that give thanks to God and give to one another as they have need. Kind of like the beginning of the early church being established. Here is the people of God. They're not defined by taking. They're defined by Jesus alone. I don't know exactly what all the implications for this text look like for us. I don't know necessarily what it looks like on a daily basis. I see moments of it. Regularly, I see moments of it where I see somebody give beyond what I ever thought was imaginable. Where I see somebody walk with someone that others would have given up on long ago. Where I see marriages that were incredibly unhealthy somehow find a complete rebirth because they allow God to determine who they are. And I see people rise from the ashes of the brokenness of this world and the brokenness of relationships and their own sin and become beautiful witnesses to something greater than what we see. It's time, I really do believe it's time for us to begin imagining again what good and great things God might do with us if we would just be His people. What might He do? What might it look like? And it ought to excite us to know that we right now are in the process of participating with God in building an eternal kingdom. That's what we're doing. And what takes place today will echo throughout all of eternity if we will just participate with God. If we will just participate. Not send others to do it for us, like what's taking place in the text, but to participate. And we can do that. We can do that. Because God says, I'll give you everything you need to accomplish it, and my Spirit will lead you through it. I want to pray, beg God for His Spirit to dwell among us and to make us this type of people.